Did you know that on the evening of Monday, May 3rd, 1999, the strongest tornado ever recorded on Earth tore through the town of Bridge Creek, Oklahoma? This tornado wasn't just powerful, it was historic. It reached wind speeds of 321 miles per hour, the fastest wind ever measured on the planet. That record was captured by a special mobile Doppler radar just as the tornado hit peak strength. It didn't just break records, it tore apart everything in its path. The day started out like many others in springtime Oklahoma. The Storm Prediction Center had only issued a slight risk for severe weather. That morning, nobody had any idea what was coming. Meteorologists later realized the data had missed a powerful jet stream streak, high in the atmosphere. It came in fast from the west and wasn't picked up by models until it was already overhead. That, combined with warm, humid air rising from the Gulf of Mexico and a diffused dry line moving across the region, created the perfect setup for disaster. But at the time, most people were going about their day as usual. It wasn't until the afternoon that things started to change. Around 3:20 p.m., a small storm started building in southwestern Oklahoma over northeastern Tillman County. It didn't look like much at first, but then it began feeding off the warm surface air and upper-level winds. By 4:15, the National Weather Service had issued a severe thunderstorm warning as the storm moved into Comanche County. Hail the size of golf balls started falling, and the storm was picking up speed. People began to realize this wasn't just another spring storm. By 6:23 p.m., the first signs of real danger appeared. A new tornado touched down just 2 miles south-southwest of Amber, a small town in Grady County. This was tornado number 9, from the supercell storm that had formed hours earlier, but this one was different. Within minutes, it had strengthened to an F4 tornado and was growing in size. It quickly turned into what's called a wedge tornado, wide, powerful, and deadly. It wasn't long before it reached the town of Bridge Creek, where the worst of the destruction would soon unfold. The tornado reached F5 strength as it hit Bridge Creek. Homes were not just damaged, they were gone. Entire buildings were lifted from their foundations and scattered like matchsticks. Cars and trucks were thrown hundreds of yards. In one case, a vehicle was tossed nearly a quarter of a mile. The wind speeds inside the tornado were so high that they weren't even measurable by normal radar systems. Mobile Doppler captured that record-breaking 321 miles per hour wind inside the storm, making it the most violent tornado ever measured. Bridge Creek was left unrecognizable. Streets disappeared under piles of debris, trees were shredded, power lines and communication towers collapsed. And through it all, residents were scrambling to survive. The storm was just getting started, and what came next would push emergency systems, communities, and families to their breaking points. After tearing through Bridge Creek with unimaginable force, the tornado continued its deadly path northeast. It was now heading straight for the heavily populated city of Moore. This wasn't a remote storm anymore. This was a direct threat to thousands of lives. As the tornado left Bridge Creek behind around 6:40 p.m., meteorologists at the National Weather Service in Norman, Oklahoma, knew they had something catastrophic on their hands. Veteran forecasters were stunned by the radar images. The tornado's signature was massive, and the debris ball, an area of radar showing flying wreckage, was clear and alarming. It meant the tornado was not only strong, but was actively destroying structures. A tornado emergency was issued for the first time in history. This wasn't just a typical tornado warning. It was a new level of alert. The words used in the warning were clear and terrifying. A violent tornado was on the ground, causing massive destruction and moving toward populated areas. People in the path were told to take shelter immediately and not to wait. By 7 p.m., the tornado was entering the outskirts of Moore. Unlike Bridge Creek, Moore was densely developed. Homes sat side by side, schools, shopping centers, and busy highways filled the landscape, and it was rush hour. Hundreds of cars were stuck in traffic on Interstate 35 as the storm approached. Many people abandoned their vehicles and ran for cover under overpasses or into nearby ditches, hoping to escape the storm. The tornado remained at F5 strength as it reached Moore. It destroyed entire neighborhoods. Entire blocks were swept clean off their foundations. Schools were flattened. A large portion of a hospital was heavily damaged. A massive natural gas pipeline was struck, and for a short time, officials feared an explosion. A fire station and several emergency buildings were among the many structures lost to the storm. A local news station was broadcasting live throughout the event. Their helicopter pilot Jim Gardner flew over the storm as it moved across Moore, giving viewers a terrifying bird's-eye view of the damage in real time. His voice cracked as he described what he was seeing. Homes leveled, neighborhoods gone, fires burning where houses had once stood. His footage would later become some of the most well-known tornado coverage ever recorded. In neighborhoods like Eastlake Estates and Highland Park, families huddled in closets, bathtubs, and storm shelters as the tornado tore through. Many survived only because they had taken shelter in time. Others weren't as lucky. The winds were too strong, and in some cases, even storm shelters were compromised. The raw power of the tornado exceeded what many homes and buildings were built to withstand. By the time the tornado left Moore, it had been on the ground for more than 30 minutes and had carved a damage path more than 20 miles long, but it was not done yet. It was still moving, still violent, and still had more destruction ahead as it pushed toward the city of Del City and eventually the outskirts of Oklahoma City. As the tornado exited Moore, it pressed onward toward Del City. It was now around 7:15 in the evening. Though still extremely powerful, its winds had begun to slightly weaken, but it remained a massive, deadly storm. It continued to hold its strength as it moved through more urban areas, expanding the trail of devastation. Del City, located just southeast of downtown Oklahoma City, was heavily impacted. Entire rows of homes were damaged or destroyed. Large trees were uprooted and tossed into roadways, power lines snapped, and transformers exploded, plunging parts of the city into darkness. Emergency services struggled to navigate the debris-strewn streets as residents emerged from their shelters, many in shock at the destruction around them. In this part of the storm's path, the tornado damaged several schools, apartment buildings, and small businesses. A large warehouse collapsed entirely, though thankfully it had been evacuated minutes before the tornado arrived. Vehicles were tossed across parking lots and highways. Some were thrown into buildings or wedged between structures. The Twister's rotation began to wobble as it neared Tinker Air Force Base. The base had been placed on full alert after the tornado emergency was issued. Military aircraft had been moved to safety earlier in the day, but the base's outer areas still sustained damage. Several non-hardened structures near the perimeter were torn apart. Housing units on the edge of the base were hit, though base officials later confirmed there were no fatalities within the installation. As the tornado approached the eastern edge of Oklahoma City, its width was still measured at nearly 1 mile across. Rain-wrapped and difficult to see in the fading light, it remained a serious threat. Weather, spotters, and storm chasers followed at a safe distance, documenting the storm's continuing power. The tornado's winds were no longer at their earlier peak, but they remained intense enough to collapse homes, snap steel poles, and fling debris over long distances. It moved at around 30 miles per hour, giving people in its path very little time to react. Many relied on news updates, radio reports, and warnings from neighbors to take shelter. At 7:30 in the evening, the tornado's structure began to weaken noticeably. Its core circulation lost some definition, and its winds slowly decreased. Still, it caused damage as far as Choctaw before finally lifting off the ground after being on a continuous rampage for nearly 1 full hour. In total, it had traveled more than 38 miles across central Oklahoma, causing destruction in rural areas, suburbs, and cities alike. Though the tornado had lifted, the crisis was far from over. Emergency workers faced the grim task of searching for survivors, treating the injured, and assessing the full scope of what had just occurred. The worst tornado in Oklahoma history had finally passed, but the scars it left behind would remain for years to come. After the tornado dissipated near Choctaw, emergency crews quickly mobilized across the storm's wide path of destruction. Firefighters, paramedics, and search and rescue teams from multiple counties moved into action. Many had been tracking the storm's movement in real time and were already preparing before it touched down. As darkness fell, they faced collapsed buildings, downed power lines, flooded streets, and the overwhelming task of reaching those trapped beneath debris. The Oklahoma National Guard was activated that same evening. Units were sent to assist with search efforts, traffic control, and delivering supplies. Roads had to be cleared for ambulances and fire trucks to get through. In some neighborhoods, street signs were gone and landmarks had vanished, making navigation almost impossible. Helicopters from news stations and rescue services hovered overhead, shining spotlights onto flattened homes in hopes of finding survivors. Hospitals across Oklahoma City and surrounding towns began receiving the injured shortly after the tornado passed. Emergency rooms were filled with patients suffering from cuts, broken bones, and blunt force trauma. Triage centers were set up near heavily affected neighborhoods to care for those who could not immediately be transported. Medical personnel from outside the area volunteered their services, some driving through the night to help. Thousands of residents were left without homes. Temporary shelters were opened in churches, schools, and community centers. The American Red Cross and local aid organizations provided food, blankets, and emotional support. Survivors spoke in hushed tones, stunned by the destruction. Many had lost family members, neighbors, or close friends. As word of the disaster spread, volunteers poured in from nearby states. Some brought tools and supplies, while others simply offered their time and labor. Neighbors worked side by side, clearing wreckage and searching for missing persons. In the days that followed, rescue operations turned to recovery efforts. Heavy equipment was brought in to remove larger debris and uncover the remains of buildings. Damage assessment teams began documenting the extent of the destruction. Preliminary estimates placed the cost in the billions. Hundreds of businesses had been destroyed, and entire subdivisions were wiped off the map. Cars were found upside down in fields. Pieces of homes were discovered dozens of miles away from where they once stood. FEMA began coordinating with state officials to provide federal disaster aid. Families were given temporary housing assistance and financial support for rebuilding. Insurance companies faced a record number of claims. Recovery would be a long, difficult process. Even amid the devastation, moments of hope stood out. Pets were reunited with owners. Individuals were pulled alive from collapsed structures days after the tornado hit. Communities came together in powerful ways, cooking meals, raising funds, and helping strangers. The storm had taken a terrible toll, but it also revealed the resilience of the people who endured it. In the months and years following the May 3, 1999 tornado, the scars it left behind remained visible in both the landscape and the people. While many neighborhoods slowly began rebuilding, some areas never fully recovered. Entire subdivisions were reimagined with stronger construction standards. New homes were built with reinforced storm shelters or underground safe rooms, something that became more common throughout central Oklahoma. The disaster prompted changes at both the local and national level. Building codes in tornado-prone areas were reviewed and updated. Schools began investing in safe rooms and improving their emergency preparedness plans, and public awareness campaigns educated people on how to protect themselves during severe weather. The phrase "get underground" became a common part of the vocabulary in Oklahoma homes. Meteorologists and emergency managers used the event as a case study to improve future warnings. The success of the early alert system, which gave residents over 30 minutes of lead time, was a major focus. It demonstrated how vital advanced technology and clear communication could be in saving lives. Local TV stations, weather apps, and NOAA weather radios became even more important tools for staying safe during storm season. For many survivors, the emotional effects lasted far longer than the physical cleanup. Some developed symptoms of post-traumatic stress, especially children who had taken shelter while their homes were torn apart above them. Counseling services were offered across the region, and support groups formed to help people heal. Stories of bravery, loss, and survival were shared at memorials and anniversary events. The tornado also had a lasting impact on how the world viewed extreme weather in the United States. It became one of the most studied tornadoes in history. Scientists analyzed its path, wind speeds, and damage to better understand how such powerful storms form and behave. New radar systems and storm tracking software were developed with lessons learned from that day. Several documentaries and books have been produced to preserve the memories of those affected. Monuments were built in Bridge Creek and more to honor the lives lost. Each year on May 3rd, people gather to reflect and pay tribute. It's not just a day of mourning, it is a day of remembrance, strength, and community. Despite all that was lost, the people of Oklahoma rebuilt with determination. They carried on, not by forgetting the storm, but by learning from it. The May 3rd tornado changed how the country prepares for disasters. It left behind a powerful legacy, one of survival, resilience, and the enduring spirit of those who lived through one of the most violent tornadoes in recorded history. In August of 2017, Hurricane Harvey made history as one of the most devastating storms to ever hit the United States. With its catastrophic rainfall and widespread flooding, it left a lasting impact on Texas and Louisiana, claiming lives, displacing thousands, and causing billions in damage. In this video, we'll take a closer look at how Hurricane Harvey formed, its destruction, and the lasting lessons learned from the storm. Join us as we explore the powerful forces behind this natural disaster and its aftermath. Hurricane Harvey started its journey as a tropical wave on August 12, 2017. This wave emerged from the coast of Africa, moving across the Atlantic Ocean towards the Caribbean. Over the next few days, the system began to show signs of development. By August 17th, the tropical wave had strengthened enough to become a tropical depression, with winds reaching 45 miles per hour. As Harvey made its way into the Caribbean, it briefly weakened due to unfavorable wind conditions. By August 19th, it had degenerated into a tropical wave again. However, it wasn't the end for Harvey. By August 23rd, the system was back on track, with a fresh surface low forming in the Bay of Campeche off the coast of Mexico. This marked the beginning of the storm's rapid intensification. By August 24th, Harvey had regained its strength, transforming into a tropical storm with winds exceeding 60 miles per hour. It quickly gained momentum as it moved towards the Gulf Coast of the United States. The storm continued to intensify as it approached the Texas coastline. By August 25th, Harvey strengthened into a Category 4 hurricane, packing winds of over 130 miles per hour. Harvey's journey from a small tropical wave to a powerful hurricane was a reminder of how unpredictable nature can be. What started as a modest system over the Atlantic Ocean quickly transformed into one of the most devastating storms in U.S. history. At this point, the storm was about to make landfall and change the lives of millions of people. The devastation that followed would be a result of the immense rainfall and flooding that would accompany Harvey's landfall in Texas. On August 25, 2017, Hurricane Harvey made its first landfall near Rockport, Texas, as a powerful Category 4 hurricane. With sustained winds reaching 135 miles per hour, Harvey's winds caused widespread damage to buildings, infrastructure, and trees along the coastline. The storm surge was particularly destructive, flooding coastal areas and leaving many residents trapped. In addition to the surge, the rain that Harvey brought with it began to fall in staggering amounts, setting the stage for the catastrophic flooding that would soon follow. After making landfall, Harvey didn't waste any time moving inland. It began to slow down, almost stalling over eastern Texas. This slow movement allowed Harvey to unload record-breaking rainfall. In some places, the rain began to accumulate rapidly, with more than 40 inches of rain falling in just a few days. As the storm lingered over Texas, areas such as Nederland received a jaw-dropping 60 inches of rain, making it the wettest tropical cyclone in U.S. history at that time. The heavy rainfall caused rivers and bayous to overflow, leading to widespread flooding in greater Houston and surrounding areas. The floodwaters quickly turned streets into rivers, submerging homes, businesses, and entire neighborhoods. The rising waters trapped thousands of people in their homes, forcing many to seek refuge on rooftops or in attics. Emergency rescue operations quickly began, with local authorities, the National Guard, and volunteers working tirelessly to save lives and evacuate those in danger. In total, more than 30,000 people were displaced, and over 17,000 rescues were made across Texas. Harvey's impact wasn't limited to Texas alone. Louisiana also felt the storm's wrath, but the most severe damage was centered in Texas. The storm continued to release heavy rain even as it moved northeastward, leaving behind a trail of destruction that would take months, if not years, to recover from. At this point, it was clear that Hurricane Harvey was going to be one of the most devastating storms to hit the United States in recent memory. As Hurricane Harvey continued to dump rain over Texas, the scale of the devastation became clearer. By August 29, 2017, parts of the state had been submerged under several feet of water. Roads, highways, and bridges were impassable, and many areas were left without power for extended periods. The massive flooding overwhelmed the region's infrastructure, leaving residents stranded and without basic services. Hospitals and emergency services were stretched to their limits as they worked around the clock to care for the injured and evacuate those in need. In the aftermath, communities faced severe challenges. The flooding not only caused widespread property damage, but also impacted essential services like water supply, electricity, and healthcare. In Houston, the fourth largest city in the United States, floodwaters inundated thousands of homes. Entire neighborhoods were left uninhabitable, and more than 400,000 people had to seek shelter, many in temporary shelters set up by the Red Cross and other relief organizations. Despite the overwhelming devastation, Texans showed incredible resilience. Local residents, firefighters, police officers, and volunteers from around the country came together To assist in rescue efforts, the U.S. military and the National Guard deployed personnel to help with search and rescue operations, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, quickly provided support in the form of food, water, and emergency supplies. The sight of people using boats, canoes, and even airboats to rescue stranded families became a symbol of hope and community solidarity during this dark time. The response was swift, but the recovery process was far from quick. Over 300,000 homes were affected, and many sustained severe damage. More than 1,000 homes were destroyed, and thousands more had major structural damage. Houston alone saw around 32,000 homes damaged, with significant destruction in low-lying areas. The sheer magnitude of the disaster meant that recovery efforts would take years, and many people were forced to rebuild their lives from scratch. The emotional and psychological toll was also significant. For many, the loss of homes, personal belongings, and even loved ones was devastating. The storm claimed the lives of more than 100 people in total, with the majority of those deaths occurring in Texas. In addition to the direct effects of the storm, many people experienced long-term challenges such as displacement, financial hardships, and the trauma of losing everything they had. Despite the overwhelming challenges, the disaster also led to widespread support. Communities and individuals came together, providing donations, volunteering, and offering assistance in any way they could. The generosity and unity that emerged during this difficult time highlighted the strength of the human spirit in the face of tragedy. While the recovery would take years, the response to Hurricane Harvey demonstrated the power of community and resilience in times of crisis. In the wake of Hurricane Harvey, it became clear that the disaster's effects would extend far beyond the immediate recovery efforts. The storm highlighted several key issues related to infrastructure, flood management, and the need for better preparedness in future natural disasters. One of the most significant lessons learned from Harvey was the vulnerability of certain areas, especially in relation to flooding. Houston, which sits on flat land and has a sprawling urban development, found its drainage systems overwhelmed by the unprecedented rainfall. The storm's catastrophic flooding demonstrated that existing flood control measures were inadequate to handle such an extreme event. Many experts called for major changes in how cities like Houston manage stormwater, emphasizing the need for improved infrastructure to better protect communities from future flooding. As a result, local officials began working on the long-term strategies to bolster the city's flood defenses, including expanding reservoirs, upgrading stormwater drainage systems, and focusing on urban planning that accounts for more resilient water management. However, these changes would require significant time, resources, and coordination between local, state, and federal agencies. Another critical lesson was the importance of emergency preparedness and the need for a faster, more efficient response in future disasters. While the response to Harvey was swift, it became evident that certain areas were caught off guard by the storm's intensity and duration. Many people were forced to evacuate without adequate warning, and emergency services were initially overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster. As a result, authorities began re-evaluating emergency evacuation plans, communication systems, and coordination with neighboring regions to ensure that future evacuations and relief efforts could be carried out more effectively. In addition to the physical damage, the economic impact of Hurricane Harvey was staggering. The storm caused an estimated $125 billion in damages, making it the second costliest natural disaster in U.S. history at the time. Thousands of businesses were forced to close, and the oil and gas industry in Texas was significantly disrupted. The loss of income, combined with the cost of rebuilding, created significant financial challenges for both individuals and communities. Despite these setbacks, many businesses began to recover in the months that followed, and the local economy slowly rebounded. The storm also led to an increase in conversations about the need for stronger building codes, especially in areas prone to flooding. The mental and emotional impact of the storm lingered for many survivors. Displacement, the loss of homes, and the overwhelming destruction took a toll on the mental health of thousands. However, the support systems and the strength of local communities helped many individuals cope with the trauma. Mental health services were made available to those affected, and the resilience shown by survivors and volunteers became a testament to the power of human spirit in the face of tragedy. As Texas and the Gulf Coast region continue to recover, Hurricane Harvey's impact serves as a reminder of the unpredictable power of nature, and the importance of being prepared. The storm's aftermath has led to improvements in disaster response protocols and a greater focus on climate change and its potential to fuel more extreme weather events. While it remains one of the costliest and most devastating storms in history, the lessons learned from Hurricane Harvey have shaped future disaster response and recovery efforts, helping communities better prepare for the challenges that lie ahead. As the years pass, Texas and the affected regions will continue to rebuild, but the memories of Hurricane Harvey will remain. The storm not only changed the physical landscape, but also altered the way people think about climate change, infrastructure, and resilience in the face of natural disasters. In the middle of the ocean between the islands of Java and Sumatra, there was a small but powerful volcano known as Krakatoa. It sat in the Sunda Strait, part of a chain of islands in what is now Indonesia. At first glance, it didn't seem especially dangerous. It was just one of many volcanic islands in the region, mostly covered in trees, with steep rocky slopes and quiet coastlines. But Krakatoa had a violent past. Old records and local legends told of earlier eruptions long before the 19th century. Some even said entire civilizations may have been affected by Krakatoa's earlier explosions. Scientists later found layers of volcanic rock in the area that hinted at a massive eruption many centuries earlier, possibly one of the largest the world had ever seen. By the 1800s, the volcano had been silent for a long time. People lived on nearby islands and along the coasts of Java and Sumatra without much worry. The waters around the island were busy with trade ships and fishing boats. The land was rich and full of life. Then, in May of the year 1883, the first clear sign appeared that something was changing. Without warning, Krakatoa began to rumble. A column of ash shot into the sky, surprising nearby ships and startling villagers who could see the black cloud from miles away. At the time, it didn't seem too serious. Many believed the volcano was just letting off a bit of pressure. But scientists of the time, including Dutch colonial officials, took notice. Some began to record the strange activity, keeping notes on the ash, the small earthquakes, and the changing color of the sea near the island. Still, no one could have predicted what was coming. What started as a quiet island in the sea was about to become the center of one of the most powerful natural disasters in recorded history. By the middle of August, in the year 1883, Krakatoa was no longer quiet. The warning signs had become impossible to ignore. A thick black cloud hung over the island, and loud booming sounds echoed across the sea. Ships passing through the nearby Sunda Strait reported seeing ash fall onto their decks. Some described the strange sight of lightning flashing from inside the ash cloud, something now known as volcanic lightning. On Sunday, August 26th, the first massive explosion happened just after noon. It was so loud that it was heard more than 1,000 miles away in Perth, Australia, and even farther in places like the island of Rodriguez, over 2,800 miles away. People thought it was the sound of gunfire or cannon blasts, but this was only the beginning. That evening, and into the early morning hours, the volcano erupted again and again, each time with more force. The island was breaking apart from within. Tremors shook the ground and the sky turned completely dark with ash. The sun disappeared behind thick clouds of dust and rock, and it seemed like night had fallen in the middle of the day. Then came the largest explosion of all. On the morning of Monday, August 27th, just before 9 o'clock. The force of this final blast was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. A huge part of Krakatoa, including the entire northern portion of the island, was blown apart. The explosion sent ash and rock more than 20 miles into the sky. The pressure wave from the blast traveled around the entire world 4 times. Nearby islands were devastated. Coastal towns on Java and Sumatra were shaken to their foundations. But the worst part was not the explosion itself. It was what followed, a massive, deadly tsunami. After the final eruption tore Krakatoa apart on the morning of Monday, August 27th, the force of the explosion triggered something just as deadly, a massive tsunami. As the volcano collapsed into the sea, it displaced millions of tons of water, sending waves racing in all directions. The tsunami struck the nearby coastlines of both Java and Sumatra with almost no warning. Entire villages were swallowed up in minutes. In some places, waves reached as high as 120 feet. Fishing boats were thrown far inland. Houses, markets, and then mosques were reduced to splinters and carried away by the water. People who had survived the ash and falling debris now found themselves facing an even greater danger, the ocean itself. Some of the most devastating damage occurred in the town of Merak on the coast of Java. Eyewitnesses described how the sea suddenly pulled back, leaving fish flopping in the sand. Then a towering wall of water appeared on the horizon. Within seconds, it crashed into the town, wiping it off the map. No buildings were left standing. Farther away on the island of Sumatra, the waves still reached with terrifying force. One survivor from a coastal village described climbing a tree to escape the water, only to be thrown back down as the tree was torn from the ground. Entire families disappeared. Those who lived through it often did so by clinging to pieces of wood or floating in the floodwaters for hours. Even ships at sea were affected. Some vessels reported being lifted and thrown by the sudden waves, while others vanished without a trace. Ports as far away as Sri Lanka and India recorded strange water movements caused by the tsunami. In the Indian Ocean, the shockwaves continued to ripple outward, eventually being recorded on tide gauges as far as South Africa and even the English Channel. The death toll was staggering. Over 36,000 people lost their lives, most of them from the tsunami. In many coastal areas, there were simply no survivors to tell what happened. The landscape was changed completely, towns erased, harbors reshaped, and the coastline carved anew by the sea. Krakatoa's eruption was over, but the suffering had only just begun. The people who lived through it faced a world that looked nothing like the one they had known the day before. After the eruption and the tsunami, Krakatoa's effects continued to spread far beyond Indonesia. In the weeks and months that followed, people around the world began noticing strange and beautiful changes in the sky. Sunsets turned deep red and orange. Some places reported purple twilights and golden clouds. In cities like London, New York, and Rio de Janeiro, the sky glowed in unusual colors long after the sun had gone down. These changes were caused by the massive amount of volcanic ash and gas that Krakatoa sent into the upper atmosphere. That ash spread across the globe, carried by high winds, sunlight hitting the tiny particles scattered in a different way, causing the strange colors. People did not know at the time that what they were seeing was connected to a volcanic eruption on the other side of the world. In some countries, people thought the red skies were signs of war or a message from God. Artists and writers tried to capture the strange light in paintings and poems. One of the most famous paintings from that time, The Scream by Edvard Munch, is believed to have been inspired by the red sky that followed Krakatoa's eruption. But the ash did more than change the sky. It also affected the weather. The sunlight that reached the Earth's surface was slightly reduced, causing global temperatures to drop. The year after the eruption, many places reported colder weather and strange patterns in rain and snowfall. This cooling effect was felt for more than a year. Scientists at the time were still learning about volcanoes, but Krakatoa helped change that. It was one of the first natural disasters to be studied using worldwide communication. Reports from telegraph offices and weather stations were collected and compared. The event helped scientists understand how volcanic eruptions could affect the whole planet. Krakatoa's eruption also taught a painful lesson about warning systems and preparedness. Many people living near the volcano had no idea of the danger they were in. Afterward, efforts slowly began to improve ways to monitor volcanoes and oceans. Today, that tragic eruption is one of the reasons early warning systems exist for tsunamis and volcanic activity. In the end, the eruption of Krakatoa in the year 1883 was more than just a disaster for Indonesia. It was a global event that shook the earth, changed the sky, and left a deep mark in both science and memory. The volcano itself was mostly destroyed, but its story still lives on as one of the most powerful and far-reaching natural events in human history. Did you know that some tornadoes can have winds faster than a race car? The tornado that hit Greenfield, Iowa, on the afternoon of May 21st, 2024, had wind speeds that reached over 300 miles per hour according to radar. That's faster than most things on the road or in the air, but the tornado didn't just break records, it broke hearts, homes, and a whole community. The day started like any other spring day in Iowa, but the weather experts already knew trouble was coming. That morning, the Storm Predictions Center gave the area a moderate risk for severe weather, especially tornadoes. It wasn't just Greenfield that was in danger. The entire region, including parts of Missouri, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota, was under watch. A mix of warm, moist air from the south met with cooler, dry air, and by afternoon, storms had already started forming. The setup was perfect for something dangerous to form, and unfortunately, it did. At around 2:57 p.m., the tornado touched down in rural Page County, Iowa. At first, it didn't look like much, just some branches ripped from trees and minor damage to a farm building. But this was only the beginning. As it moved northeast, it passed through parts of Taylor and Adams counties, growing stronger with each mile. It crossed over fields, tore through power poles, and slammed into farm buildings. Storm chasers captured the tornado on video, showing a huge funnel cloud spinning with a wide debris field below. That was the first real clue that this was going to be a serious storm. The tornado became stronger quickly. As it passed through the countryside near Nottoway and crossed US Route 34 north of Brooks, it was already starting to look like the monster it would become. Cars on the highway were in danger, and sadly, this is where one person lost their life. A 41-year-old woman named Monica Irma Zamaron was caught in the tornado's path and thrown from her car. She didn't survive. Just after that, the tornado hit with EF2 and then EF3 strength. Those are ratings based on how much damage a tornado causes. In this case, entire homes were being torn apart. One house lost its walls and slid off its foundation, and all the buildings nearby were completely destroyed. The tornado's width expanded too, stretching over 1,300 yards across, more than 3/4 of a mile. It even showed what's called suction vortices, which are smaller, fast-spinning funnels inside the main tornado. These are what caused the most intense destruction in some areas. This was the tornado's build-up. Greenfield was next in its path, and no one could have imagined just how hard it was going to hit. By the time the tornado reached Greenfield, the damage was already widespread, but what awaited the small town was nothing short of catastrophic. As it approached from the southwest, there was no mistaking the power of this storm. In the distance, residents could see the funnel cloud descending from the sky, a dark, swirling mass of destruction on the horizon. At approximately 3:35 p.m., the tornado touched down just west of Greenfield. With winds now exceeding 200 miles per hour, it was an EF4 tornado, a classification rarely seen in populated areas. The first major hit was on the western outskirts of town, where the twister tore through residential neighborhoods. Homes, businesses, and schools in its path were completely flattened. Roofs were ripped off, windows shattered, and debris was sent flying through the air like projectiles. In some places, foundations were all that remained of what had once been family homes. The impact of the tornado was immediate and overwhelming. The sounds of the storm were deafening. Winds howling, objects slamming against each other, and the terrifying roar of the funnel cloud itself. It was as if the very ground beneath Greenfield had been picked up and tossed aside. Residents who had not yet taken shelter were caught off guard. Many rushed to their basements or any nearby safe location, hoping to ride out the storm. Those who had not made it to safety were forced to take cover wherever they could, some hiding under staircases or in bathrooms, bracing for the worst. Greenfield's school system took a direct hit. Greenfield High School, a local landmark, suffered severe damage. The roof was torn off, windows were shattered, and classrooms were left in ruins. Despite the destruction, the school's basement remained one of the safest places in town. Emergency responders and school staff worked quickly to move students to shelter, ensuring that no lives were lost in the building. It was a relief for families who were worried about the safety of their children, but the devastation outside was still staggering. As the tornado roared on, it didn't let up. The storm continued its path of destruction, moving through residential areas and beyond. The tornado ripped apart buildings on both sides of Greenfield's main street, leaving a path of debris stretching for miles. Businesses, homes, and farms that had been in the area for generations were now nothing more than piles of rubble. The sheer scale of the damage was hard to comprehend. Entire neighborhoods had been wiped out in a matter of minutes. The emotional toll on the residents of Greenfield was impossible to ignore. As the skies began to clear and the storm passed, the true extent of the damage became clear. People wandered through what was left of their homes, unable to believe the destruction they were seeing. Some searched for loved ones, while others struggled to salvage what little they could from the wreckage. For many, it was a day that would change their lives forever. After the tornado passed, Greenfield was left in a state of shock. The town, once a peaceful and quiet place, now resembled a war zone. Emergency services quickly moved in, working around the clock to assist those in need. Ambulances, fire trucks, and police cars filled the streets, with first responders tirelessly searching for survivors and assessing the damage. Their efforts were critical in the aftermath, as many people were trapped in the debris waiting for rescue. The storm had taken its toll on the community in ways that went beyond the physical destruction. In the days that followed, volunteers from nearby towns began to pour into Greenfield. Eager to help with the cleanup efforts, local churches, schools, and businesses turned into temporary shelters for displaced families, offering food, water, and comfort in a time of crisis. The spirit of unity was evident as people came together to rebuild their shattered town. The Greenfield community was determined not to let the tornado define them, though the road to recovery would be long and difficult. One of the first tasks was to restore power. The tornado had knocked out power lines, leaving much of the town in darkness. Crews worked tirelessly, often in dangerous conditions, to get electricity back up and running. Meanwhile, communication lines were also down, making it harder for loved ones to check in on one another. People had to rely on word of mouth and face-to-face communication to find out what had happened to those who lived outside the hardest hit areas. By May 4th, 2 days after the tornado hit, the National Weather Service conducted a thorough assessment of the damage. Their findings confirmed that Greenfield had experienced an EF4 tornado, with winds estimated to have reached over 200 miles per hour. This level of destruction was rare, and the damage was not just limited to homes and businesses. Roads were torn apart, trees were uprooted, and vehicles were tossed aside like toys. The town was left without much of its infrastructure, and it would take months, if not years, for Greenfield to fully recover. In the immediate aftermath, many residents were left wondering what would come next. They had lost so much in such a short period of time, and the emotional scars would linger long after the physical rebuilding was complete. Some families were displaced entirely, their homes beyond repair. For others, the task of starting over in the face of such overwhelming loss seemed almost impossible. Still, the sense of community was a source of strength. Local and national organizations raised millions of dollars in donations to support those affected by the disaster. Greenfield wasn't alone in its recovery efforts, and with help from across the country, the town began to slowly pick up the pieces. Even as the cleanup continued, many residents began to reflect on the experience. The tornado had changed their perspective on life. It had shown them the fragility of existence and the importance of community. Despite the pain and loss, there was also a deep sense of gratitude for the lives that were saved, for the support that poured in from near and far, and for the resilience of the people of Greenfield. As the months passed, the town would begin to rebuild, but it would never forget the events of May 2nd, one of the darkest days in its history. As the months went by, the people of Greenfield focused on rebuilding their lives and their town. The emotional toll of the tornado was still fresh in many minds, but the resilience of the community shone through. While the process of recovery was far from easy, there was a growing sense of hope as Greenfield began to heal. In the wake of the disaster, the town received significant support from local government agencies, volunteers, and organizations. These efforts were crucial in getting Greenfield back on its feet. Many businesses that had been destroyed in the tornado were able to reopen thanks to relief funds and grants. Homeowners, with the help of insurance companies and financial assistance, worked to rebuild their houses. The support was overwhelming, and it helped to provide some sense of normalcy in a place that had been turned upside down. Throughout the summer of 2024, the cleanup continued and the debris from the storm was cleared. Crews worked tirelessly to restore the town's infrastructure, from repairing roads to rebuilding bridges. The power grid was gradually restored, and by midsummer, Greenfield's residents were able to return to their homes, many of which had been extensively repaired or rebuilt. Schools were also reopened, and children returned to their classrooms, though it took time for the community to fully regain its footing. However, there were some lasting effects. The mental health impact of the tornado was significant. Many residents still struggled with the trauma, as the terrifying event had left deep emotional scars. The town's leaders, local counselors, and support groups worked together to offer resources for those in need. Therapy sessions and group counseling were made available to anyone who sought help, and the importance of mental health awareness became a central part of the recovery process. For some, it would take years to fully come to terms with what they had experienced, but Greenfield was dedicated to helping its residents heal, emotionally as well as physically. And by the end of the year, Greenfield had made incredible progress, but the town would never be the same. The tornado had changed the landscape, both literally and figuratively. The memories of that fateful day would stay with the residents forever, but so would the lessons learned. People had come together, helped one another, and demonstrated the power of community in the face of unimaginable loss. The Greenfield tornado of May 2nd, 2024 was a devastating event, but it was also one that showcased the strength and resilience of a small town. Though the damage was extensive, the town was able to recover because of the unwavering support from its residents and the broader community. As time passed, Greenfield continued to rebuild, and it remained a symbol of hope for those who witnessed its recovery. The story of the Greenfield tornado is not just one of destruction, but one of survival, unity, and the determination to rebuild, no matter the odds. In December of 1944, Toronto was hit by a snowstorm that would go down in history as one of the most intense and disruptive the city had ever seen. The storm began on Sunday, December 10th, and continued until Wednesday, December 13th, blanketing the city in a thick layer of snow. The storm was so powerful that it brought life in Toronto to a complete standstill. The snow piled up quickly, with estimates saying that the city received between 12 and 30 inches, or 30 to 76 centimeters of snow in just 3 days. The snowstorm wasn't just a lot of snow. It came with high winds that caused snow drifts to reach as high as 3 meters, or nearly 10 feet. These drifts trapped people inside their homes and made it nearly impossible for anyone to get around. At the heart of this massive snowstorm were two separate weather systems. One storm came from the west, dropping snow across the Midwest and the Great Plains. Another storm moving up from the southern Atlantic coast brought in additional moisture. As these two storms met over the eastern Great Lakes region, the result was a powerful weather system that produced snow, sleet, freezing rain, and fierce winds. Toronto was right in the middle of it all. The storm arrived slowly at first, with flurries starting on December 11th, but by midnight it intensified quickly. By the morning of December 12th, the storm was in full force. The snow fell heavily, with over 19 inches, or nearly 50 centimeters, of snow accumulating that day alone. For the people of Toronto, the storm was overwhelming. The roads were quickly covered and public transportation ground to a halt. Even the city's famous streetcars, which were a major part of Toronto's public transport system, were stuck. The snow was so deep that it made it impossible for buses to run. And commuter train services were also disrupted. At one point, it was reported that only the Yonge, King, and Queen streetcar lines managed to stay in operation. But even then, the service was slow, and the snow kept filling in the cleared tracks. Schools and businesses closed as the city struggled to cope with the snowstorm. The University of Toronto, the Toronto Stock Exchange, and many department stores remained shut for the day. In fact, an estimated 80% of businesses in the city didn't open on December 12th. The local newspapers, such as the Toronto Daily Star and the Globe and Mail, had their operations affected as well. On December 12th, the Toronto Daily Star published only a limited number of copies, and the Globe and Mail had to cancel its December 13th edition entirely. Emergency services were overwhelmed by the storm. Ambulances, fire trucks, and other emergency vehicles couldn't get through the snow to reach those who needed help. People who were stranded in the snow were left waiting for hours, and emergency response times were slow. Hospitals became overcrowded with patients, and the Red Cross set up shelters to assist those in need. At one point, workers of the Victory Aircraft Factory in Malton, located just outside Toronto, were stranded for over 12 hours due to snowdrifts that completely blocked the road to their homes. Some workers had to spend the night in nearby schools and service stations as they waited for the storm to let up. It wasn't just workers in industrial areas that were affected. Entire neighborhoods found themselves isolated by the heavy snow. In addition to the danger the snow brought, the cold temperatures also posed a serious threat. Power lines were snapped by the wind, leaving many homes without electricity. For some, the lack of power meant no heat during a brutal winter storm. To make matters worse, many of the city's water pumps froze, and this further threatened the water supply. With grocery stores and businesses closed and the roads blocked, food deliveries into the city were severely limited. By December 12th, only 3% of the usual milk supply was able to reach Toronto. To make sure residents had enough, the mayor had to request people to limit their consumption of milk and bread. Emergency food supplies were distributed to fire halls, where people could purchase what they needed. It was a tough time for the people of Toronto, but this was just the beginning of the storm's impact. As the snow continued to fall, it soon became clear that this was going to be one of the most severe storms in Toronto's history, and it would take days, even weeks, for the city to recover. As the storm raged on through December 12th, the situation in Toronto grew more desperate. The city's streets were buried under thick snow, and residents found themselves trapped in their homes or stranded wherever they happened to be. With snowdrifts piling up as high as 3 meters, moving around the city became almost impossible. The government declared that only essential services could be active, and the mayor urged people to stay home unless they absolutely needed to be out. For many, this was not just an inconvenience, it was a crisis. By the morning of December 13th, Toronto had received more than 22 inches or 57 centimeters of snow, and it was clear that the storm wasn't going to let up anytime soon. The wind picked up, making the snow blow even harder, and temperatures continued to plummet, turning everything into a frozen, treacherous landscape. Those who had already been stranded the day before found themselves completely stuck, unable to even get to a store or find warmth. Emergency vehicles and ambulances could barely navigate the snow, and people began to worry about running out of essential supplies like food and fuel. Transportation throughout the city was halted. Only a small number of streetcar lines managed to remain open, but even those had trouble keeping up with the ever-deepening snow. For residents who depended on buses to get around, service was completely suspended. Commuter train services were almost completely blocked, leaving entire neighborhoods isolated. Suburbs like Weston, Leaside, and Long Branch became cut off from the rest of the city, and those stuck in these areas were unable to get help. In some cases, workers were stranded in factories or other workplaces as the roads became impassable. With so many businesses and services closed, the city's ability to function began to break down. Factories that were vital to the war effort, like the Victory aircraft plant in Malton, were unable to run because workers couldn't get to work. In fact, some employees found themselves trapped for over 12 hours, spending the night in schools and nearby service stations. The city was essentially on lockdown, with no way to bring in the supplies needed to maintain daily life. The supply of essential goods, especially food and milk, was dangerously low. The snowstorm didn't just impact businesses and transportation. It also affected Toronto's hospitals and emergency services. With ambulances unable to get through to transport patients, hospitals became crowded with people who were injured or sick. The emergency rooms were overflowing, and doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to care for everyone. The storm also kept people inside their homes for longer periods, making it more difficult to deal with common winter illnesses or injuries. The situation was further complicated by the power outages caused by the storm. As the winds picked up, trees and power lines were knocked down, leaving much of the city without electricity. The cold made it almost unbearable for those stuck without heat, and with no way to cook food, many were left depending on whatever supplies they had left in their homes. By the evening of December 12th, the mayor issued a public request for residents to conserve food and water, asking that everyone be cautious about how much they consumed until supplies could be brought back into the city. Despite the massive effort to dig out from under the snow, some neighborhoods remained completely blocked with little to no access. People in these areas had to wait for emergency crews to clear the roads, and it wasn't until December 14th that most suburban bus and train services were finally restored. The roads were still covered in snow, and the snow drifts that had buried the streets made travel slow and dangerous. It became clear that this wasn't just a snowstorm, it was a disaster, and it would take much longer for Toronto to recover than anyone had expected. Yet despite the overwhelming challenges, there were signs of hope. People came together, helping their neighbors and working as a community to make it through the storm. The storm was a true test of Toronto's resilience, and even as the city struggled to clear its streets, the citizens' efforts and solidarity during these difficult days would go down in history as an example of the strength of a community in the face of adversity. The people of Toronto would never forget the Great Snowstorm of 1944, as it left a lasting impact on the city and its people, forever changing how they approached future winter storms. By December 15th, Toronto was still reeling from the aftermath of the Great Snowstorm of 1944. Though emergency services and snowplows were making progress in clearing the roads, many areas remained inaccessible. The weight of the snow on rooftops, coupled with the freezing temperatures, caused serious damage across the city. Buildings were collapsing and infrastructure was under immense strain. The municipal government urged residents to stay indoors and not attempt to shovel snow or clear block streets, as the danger of further damage was high. The weather didn't show any signs of relenting. On the morning of December 16th, a new wave of snow began to fall, compounding the already chaotic situation. The city had now been blanketed in over 28 inches of snow, nearly 70 centimeters. The accumulation continued to grow, and the heavy snow resulted in widespread roof collapses in both residential and commercial buildings. Emergency responders had to rush to affected areas, trying to rescue people trapped under fallen debris. It was a race against time, as the freezing temperatures meant that hypothermia and frostbite were major concerns for those caught in the wreckage. In some neighborhoods, residents took matters into their own hands, organizing makeshift rescue teams to help dig out the snow and assist those who were unable to do so themselves. These acts of kindness became a common sight across the city, as people braved the freezing conditions to help one another. The city's hospitals were still overwhelmed with patients, and the lack of medical resources was becoming an increasing concern. Some patients had to be transported by snowmobile or horse-drawn sleds due to the difficulty in getting an ambulance through the snow. Despite these efforts, the healthcare system struggled to keep up with the growing number of injuries, illnesses, and medical emergencies. The storm also had a profound impact on the city's schools. Many schools across Toronto were closed, and students were kept at home for longer than usual. With transportation services still not fully restored, teachers and administrators struggled to reach schools, and even if they managed to make it, the lack of power in many buildings made it impossible to carry out normal classes. For several days, children remained at home, with parents trying to keep them safe and warm as the storm continued. With supply lines still cut off, food shortages were becoming more apparent. Grocery stores had limited stock, and the long lines for what few items were available were a daily occurrence. Residents had to ration what they had, as there was no clear timeline for when regular deliveries would resume. While some stores remained open, they could not offer much in the way of fresh produce or perishable goods. Canned and dried foods were in high demand, and people became inventive with what little they had left. On December 17th, the provincial government declared a state of emergency, allowing additional resources to be deployed to help with the recovery efforts. Plows worked in shifts, clearing major routes and attempting to open up access to the suburbs. But even after days of relentless work, many of the streets remained impassable. The sheer scale of the snowstorm had caught everyone by surprise, and it was evident that it would take weeks to fully recover. Despite these challenges, the resilience of the people continued to shine through. Volunteers organized community kitchens in some neighborhoods, providing hot meals to those who couldn't leave their homes. Many people opened their doors to strangers who needed a place to stay, and local businesses offered what they could to help those in need. In times of such hardship, the sense of community grew stronger, and the people of Toronto showed an incredible spirit of unity. In the weeks that followed, the city slowly started to rebuild. The heavy snow began to subside, and by the end of December, most of the main roads were passable again. The snow plows continued to clear away the remaining drifts, and the sounds of life slowly returned to the city. The Great Snowstorm of 1944 had left an indelible mark on Toronto, and the memory of those harrowing days would stay with the citizens for years to come. The storm had tested the limits of the city's infrastructure, but it also revealed the strength of its people, their ability to adapt, and their unwavering commitment to each other in the face of adversity. By January 3rd, 1945, the worst of the Great Snowstorm of 1944 had finally passed, but the effects were still being felt across Toronto. The damage to homes, businesses, and infrastructure was extensive, and many parts of the city remained without power. With recovery efforts still ongoing, city officials focused on restoring essential services, but the challenges seemed endless. In the aftermath of the storm, numerous organizations came together to assist in the relief efforts, each doing their part to rebuild the city. Emergency shelters had been set up throughout the city, providing temporary housing to those whose homes had been destroyed or rendered uninhabitable due to collapsed roofs. These shelters were vital in offering a safe haven for families, some of whom had been forced to leave their homes and take refuge in community centers and schools. The government, as well as the charitable groups, organized relief programs to distribute food, clothing, and basic supplies to those in need. Volunteers worked tirelessly, often braving the cold to help families access what little food and water remained available. Despite the hardships, the people of Toronto continued to demonstrate resilience. Many residents took it upon themselves to check on their neighbors, especially the elderly and vulnerable, making sure that they had access to food and warmth. Some individuals set up informal neighborhood repair teams, assisting those whose homes had suffered significant damage. In a city where many families had already been struggling before the storm, this sense of solidarity was crucial to the community's survival in the months that followed. At the same time, the city faced significant challenges in restoring transportation. The public transit system, which had been a vital part of daily life before the storm, was still in disarray. Snowdrifts remained on many tracks, and buses and streetcars were limited in their ability to navigate the blocked streets. The few vehicles that were able to make it through the snow did so with great difficulty. It wasn't until the second week of January that normal bus routes and streetcar services were gradually reestablished. allowing people to resume their daily routines, though the process was slow. The damage to homes and buildings was far-reaching. Thousands of roofs had collapsed under the weight of the snow, and rebuilding efforts were hampered by a shortage of construction materials. Many families who had been displaced faced the uncertainty of when they could return to their homes. As the snow began to melt, the extent of the damage was laid bare. Streets that had been impassable for days were now filled with debris, with piles of snow and wreckage being cleared away by a combination of workers and volunteers. Though many areas of the city were slowly returning to normal, some parts of Toronto were still without basic services. Water and heating systems had been disrupted in several neighborhoods, and the freezing temperatures made it difficult for families to stay warm. The shortage of fuel meant that people had to ration heating supplies carefully, relying on fireplaces or makeshift stoves to stay warm. Even in places where power had been restored, outages still occurred intermittently, further complicating recovery efforts. By the end of January, the storm's aftermath had begun to take a toll on the mental health of residents. The emotional impact of the storm was immense, with many individuals feeling isolated and overwhelmed by the challenges of rebuilding their lives. Support groups and counselors began to offer their services to those struggling with the emotional effects of the disaster, helping people process their experiences and regain a sense of hope. The winter of 1945 was marked by the continued fight for recovery. In the months following the storm, rebuilding efforts ramped up, and the city began to emerge from the devastation. New measures were put in place to prevent similar damage in future storms, such as reinforcing roofs and improving the snow removal infrastructure. While it would take years to fully recover from the Great Snowstorm of 1944, the resilience of the people of Toronto had been proven time and time again. They had weathered the worst of the storm together and had begun to rebuild their city piece by piece. As the spring of 1945 arrived, the city of Toronto began to show signs of recovery. But the scars left by the Great Snowstorm of 1944 were still visible. The damage was far-reaching, and the storm's effects were felt long after the snow had melted. However, the determination of Toronto's residents to rebuild their city was undeniable. In the face of a disaster that seemed impossible to overcome, the community came together, proving that resilience and unity could overcome even the harshest of circumstances. The rebuilding process took months and in some cases years, but Toronto's infrastructure gradually improved. The experience of the storm led to a greater awareness of the city's vulnerability to extreme weather events, and new measures were introduced to ensure that the city was better prepared for future storms. This included improvements to the public transportation system, more robust construction standards for homes and businesses, and enhanced emergency response protocols. These changes helped make Toronto more resilient in the face of future natural disasters. One of the most lasting legacies of the Great Snowstorm was the sense of community that emerged in the aftermath. People from all walks of life came together to help their neighbors, volunteering their time and resources to aid in recovery efforts. The bonds formed during this challenging period became a symbol of Toronto's strength and solidarity. In the years that followed, this spirit of cooperation remained a central part of the city's identity. By the summer of 1945, much of the damage had been repaired, and life began to return to normal for many residents. Businesses reopened, families returned to their homes, and the streets were once again filled with activity. The storm may have left its mark on Toronto, but it also revealed the power of community, determination, and hope. In the end, the Great Snowstorm of 1944 served as a reminder of the unpredictable forces of nature and the importance of being prepared for the worst. It also highlighted the incredible resilience of Toronto's people, who faced one of the most severe winter storms in history, with courage and unity. While the storm's impact would never be forgotten, it was the collective effort to rebuild and move forward that ultimately defined the city's response to the disaster. As time passed, the memories of the Great Snowstorm faded, but the lessons learned from it continued to shape the city's approach to disaster preparedness and community resilience. Toronto emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected, with a renewed sense of pride in the strength of its people. The storm may have been a dark chapter in the city's history, but it also marked the beginning of a new era of cooperation, rebuilding, and hope for the future.